Happy Friday, wrapping up 2016, and welcome to day 5 of the 12 days of articles in review. My name is Mary Coughlin, and I am the president and founder of Caring Essentials Collaborative. And here we are today. I'm going to present this really awesome paper that was done by a group, Levy et al. Out of Michigan, Ann Arbor, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And it was published in Pediatric Pulmonology, and it actually is an EPUB article that is scheduled to come out in January of 2017, so literally hot off the press. The name of their article is The Impact of Hands-on Care on Infant Sleep in the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. The results that they're reporting here are part of a secondary analysis of a neuromonitoring study that they did using polysomnography. The cohort were all term to late preterm neonates. They all had a gestational age of greater than or equal to 35 weeks, admitted to the NICU at risk for some kinds of cerebral dysfunction or rule out seizure disorder and that sort of thing. So they all received full PSG, full polysomnography study. And so what they were looking at is how hands-on care affects the sleep and also respiratory stability. So they gave a little background in their paper, which is really interesting and important to know about the relevance of sleep in normal health and development for children. They talk about how alterations in sleep negatively impact behavior. They also reference a couple of articles that actually indicated that disruptions in neonatal sleep have been associated with increased distractibility in later childhood, and for low-risk preterm infants with disorganized sleep, these children were more likely to have poorer emotional regulation and cognitive development by age 5. So again, just kind of setting the stage for the clinical relevance of the work that they're doing. They go on to give you a little more background, and then they start talking about the study. So it was approved by the IRB. I told you a little bit about the cohort. These individuals all had bedside polysomnography with videography as well. And what they observed was a distinct link between handling for cares and disruptions in various sleep states. And specifically, what was really interesting is that when infants were handled during their active sleep, they were more likely to have some type of respiratory instability. They note that the PSG recordings are much more sensitive and specific for respiratory abnormalities when compared to just your standard cardiopulmonary monitors. So for a lot of these events, the alarm didn't go off on the cardiac monitor, but it did indicate that there was a disturbance in respiratory function on the PSG data. What was really interesting is that they broke down the handling. So they identified handling of the infant for clinical cares, handling the infant for technical issues around the PSG device. So there's lots of different points of contact that needed to be repositioned and stuff like that. And then they had this other kind of general category of handling for, I forget what term they used, but just kind of general handling or non-specific handling. And this was often related to parent care, parent coming in and holding the baby or touching the baby or that sort of thing. What was interesting, as I mentioned, is when they started looking at the disruptions, most of these infants were on a Q3-hour feeding schedule. Their sleep pattern was not routinely assessed. We know that infants have a general sleep cycle of 60 minutes, give or take a few minutes on either side. In the NICU, standard vital sign data collection was no longer than a 4-hour interval. So most of the babies were getting fed 3 hours, so they were getting their signs done up at that time. So there was basically a lot of handling activities going on. They did note in their discussion about the study is that they didn't make a distinction about what types of clinical cares were happening, so they couldn't really comment, but what they did note was that when clinical cares were happening, these were more disruptive to the infant. When the infant was disturbed during an active sleep, this is when they observed the respiratory instability, and specifically the infants were either hypopneic or apneic, and most oftentimes it was associated with an oxygen desaturation. When they looked at these events, as I said, they looked at the active sleep state, which is kind of equivalent to REM in adults, the quiet sleep state, which is equivalent to non-REM, and then there's this indeterminate sleep pattern, which is usually a transitional sleep state when the infant is transitioning from active to quiet sleep. Most of the respiratory events occurred during active sleep, and they were, it was statistically significant to a p-value of less than 0.001. So handling initiated for provision of clinical care as opposed to the technical care was most often associated with respiratory instability and oxygen desaturation. And so, when they go on to their discussion, again, these were term infants, but they were all requiring NICU stay. They did comment that their clinical situation was stable. They had to be stable enough to be able to handle having the PSG monitoring in place. And they extrapolate some of their results to say, gee whiz, if we're seeing this amount of autonomic instability and sleep disruption in this term cohort who were relatively clinically stable, how much of a disruption are we causing on infants who are requiring more high-intensity care, who are more critically ill, who are more premature? The study highlighted, in summary, they highlighted measurable changes that can be observed with physical care in the sleeping neonate and suggest that decreased handling or adjusting the timing of handling to avoid contact with the infant during active sleep may be beneficial. They do note, however, that, and there's other papers that talk about this as well, how clinicians, particularly nurses, are not very confident about their ability to discern whether the infant's in an active state of sleep or a quiet state of sleep. And oftentimes, active sleep may look like the infant is awake or awakening, with the one exception of that their eyes are closed. So, there's an opportunity here for education around what these sleep states look like and modification of routine caregiving. Certainly not, life-threatening interventions that need to occur, but in some of our routine cares, is there a way that we can modify our routines and our rituals to best support the infant and really provide what they call sleep-sensitive NICU care, what I call protected sleep in the NICU? And this really aligns with a lot of the work that I am passionate about doing in educating clinicians, and not just educating, but really helping folks strategize and brainstorm about what are some solutions that we can actually implement in our care environment, testing things out, seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work, and then implementing and measuring the results. So a really, really interesting paper. I urge you guys to check out the full manuscript, and I will post the link to the written annotation shortly in a little bit. Okay, so I will be posting a couple more of these over the weekend, and then back on Monday. I hope you guys are finding this interesting, clinically relevant, would be wicked awesome. I look forward to your feedback, and Happy New Year to you all. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care and care well.